Check one, two. How's everybody doing? Welcome back to Diasporas this week. We got some interesting stuff for you this week. Um, you know, we had the South African elections. We've had various things that have occurred in Africa. Traore actually increased military rule by 5 years. Um, Africa's blown up right now. It's real interesting. But we got a couple of videos before we call the professor today. We not messing around. We're hopping right into it today. So I just wanted to dive into these three videos really quickly. Um, I gotta know what you guys think about this. Gotta know what you guys think about this. So let's start with this one. All right, let's start with this one. Nah, I don't know why this is doing that. But boom, let's go to this. Let's go ahead and actually play that though.
All right, so I'm going to need West and Central Africans to gather here because I've been seeing some very disturbing content in the last 24 hours on this app, and it's bothering. Like, what on earth made you think that South Africans were going to vote the Pan Africanists? What made you think, like, if you actually thought that South Africa guy who wanted to unite all black people in Africa, then you have either never interacted with a South African, you then you are just as bad as the same Europeans that you're accusing of not giving caring about Africa because you clearly don't pay attention to anything African.
I'm not sure if the audio's choppy on everybody's end, but the audio's a little bit choppy on my end. But basically, what this guy is saying is, why should we even be surprised that South Africa, the South African elections have happened how they've happened, right? And before we dive into it, I really wanted to express my agreements in this video. It's a 5-minute video. We're not going to play for the whole thing, but there is a particular part of it where it says, he talks about Pan-Africanism, right? Black Pan-Africanism um, is only popular in certain places, right? You shouldn't have a conversation with the Somalis. You shouldn't have a conversation with the Sudanese, right? The Eritreans, right? Um, the South Africans, Kenyans, right? He mentioned Kenyans there, but there are a lot of different groups that are mentioned within this discussion in East Africa. But he was basically saying, or I'm sorry, not just East Africa, but a lot of African countries. He's basically saying, why would you be surprised that Malema has not been voted in, right? When South Africa has had this tendency for a while, and a lot of other African countries have had this tendency for a while, right? Um, it's definitely something that is tough to pinpoint because for two reasons. Number one, the colonization history among various African countries, you know, it's all different. That context is all different. And we know South Africa's context is still super recent, right? Places like Mauritania, they didn't ban slavery till I think it was the 80s, right? But you in South Africa, you had the apartheid state in the 90s. Obviously Mandela's legendary run, he 27 years on Robben Island, word to Mandela. And the ANC has a deep history there. The economic freedom fighters have been going hard for some time. But there's this context around the elections in South Africa, and a lot of the things that are going on in Africa as well someone like Malema is very much so in a different space. I'm sorry if it cut out a little bit. Please forgive me, but someone like Malema is in a different space when it comes to uh what he believes in terms of the unity of Africa, right? He believes that African unity should take precedence over, you know, the separation that is occurring today. So I before we really dive into it, I just wanted to give that context. You know, this other one was talking about he made another video, the Tasseti Reloaded guy from the previous video. He said he was addressing a comment that someone had left that said, "Bro, what are you saying? South Africans didn't vote Malema because he wanted to open the borders and let all of Africa's poverty flow into the country. Life is hard enough in South Africa." South Africans have this belief that everybody's just gonna flood to South Africa allegedly. That's not true, man. Right? And everyone is looking at the poverty of other African countries rather than asking themselves the small percentage of white South Africans that run South Africa. Why aren't they getting the amount of smoke that these African countries that may provide something, right? That are going through a similar thing. Why would they attack fellow Africans prior to the white South Africans that really run the country, right? That really run the country. You know, the 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 successors of Cecil Rhodes, right? Um and there's a family, their name is escaping me right now, but we're gonna get ready. I'm just gonna connect this cell to the Bluetooth real quick on the Rodecaster, and we're gonna call the professor because this is such a major topic. Um, but I hope y'all are ready for this, and let's get straight to it. So let's call the professor real quick.
Yes, Victor.
Hey, what's good, pops? We're on air, and we are. I'm getting some feedback from you. Can you turn off whatever volume is on in the background? Perfect, perfect.
And now?
Can you still hear me?
Yes. And can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you come a little closer to the mic though?
Okay, just a second. Just a second.
Yeah, I can hear you clear. It's just a bit muffled. I want to make sure the audio is good.
Call me back. Call me back.
Nah, it's all good. It's all good now. It's all good now. You there?
Yes.
All right. Let me actually try calling you back because the problem is back. So give me 1 second. Bear with me. I'm also gonna timestamp it.
Okay.
All right. So bear with me, y'all. You know how hard it is to get African dads on some technology. All right. It's calling back. Hello?
Hello.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Are
Can you
you on
hear me now?
speaker? Yeah, I can hear you, but I can also hear myself. So can you is there man, I don't know what's going on with Pops' phone, man. Gotta get it together. What you doing? Let's try audio. Let's try the regular FaceTime audio. Hello?
Hello.
All right, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Perfect.
Can you
Okay.
take me off
Can you
speaker
take
though?
me off speaker?
Or whatever you're watching? Because it's feedback, Dad.
There is nothing I'm watching.
Yeah. Okay. Is
And now?
That's much better. That's much better. I cannot hear myself, and that's perfect. Yeah, I can hear you perfect. So did you get a chance to watch the three videos? And welcome and thanks for coming as usual.
Yes, I watched some of them. Yes.
Yeah. So with regards to the first guy that was discussing the South African elections and not being surprised at the outcome, particularly about how South Africans view um, their own leaders, right? And this is a great example. That's a current event that applies for a lot of different African countries. And in fact, he mentioned some. He mentioned Somalia, he mentioned South Africa, he mentioned Sudan, he mentioned Kenya, right? What were your thoughts on this, and what is a good overall place to start when discussing the South African elections and just politics in South Africa in general, prior to really diving into what he said?
I mean, the most important is to understand South African politics, but basically South African democracy, and still connect this with what we've been discussing. You see, what we experienced in the last elections in South Africa was the total failure of the Rainbow Nation and the ideology behind the Rainbow Nation.
The Rainbow Nation?
Yes, Nelson Mandela created the Rainbow Nation.
Yeah.
Where everybody was expected to have a stake in it, but also to have a benefit in it. And I want to connect this with really the democratic project. The democratic project is basically a political undertaking for economic objectives and financial benefits. That although democracy takes place,
hang on, you're saying a lot. You're saying a lot here. So when you say political undertaking, in layman's terms, can you explain that context a bit? Because this is very complex and it's dense. So we need to take it down to like a fourth grade level right now.
Let's simplify it. Let's assume democracy is about elections. Elections are a political undertaking. But why are we doing it? We want benefits. Those benefits are not just what we experience at the end of elections when we are clapping and dancing up and down and sweating and saying our man or our woman won. Behind that is an expectation that there will be economic benefits for us who voted that way. And that doesn't change where you are. It is a political undertaking for economic reasons. So what we are seeing in South Africa, like everywhere else, it is the failure of that this political undertaking has been completely incapable of giving us the economic benefits that we want. And when you see people opposed to or opposing these things, it is simply because, number one, they are not getting any benefits from the outcome, or they are not feeling included in the process. And the reason why they don't feel that is because they have no benefits that are accruing. Specifically for South Africa, the Rainbow Coalition was meant to be a marriage between politics, just the signing of Mandela and de Klerk to govern, and those who held or those who controlled the means of production, the economic and South Africa's resources. And the assumption was that through this marriage, benefits would accrue to the South Africans. And because they voted en masse for Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela guaranteed or assured them that once I am the chief distributor of this national cake, I'll make sure that you have some. Nelson Mandela came. The euphoria of Nelson Mandela came. And then the subsequent ones came. But now they are still realizing that 30 years down the line, we are still not better off than when we were demanding for Mandela to be freed. And if you see what now the EFF under Malema is doing, it is reviving the pre-Mandela songs. Kill the Boer, kill the farmer, get back our lands. Because that was the promise of what they were getting and they didn't get it.
Wow. So what is going on with Malema? Similar to what happened with Kenyatta, similar to what happened with a bunch of different regimes that inherited kind of this like contextual power, right? Is that
you can't equate Malema to Kenyatta.
That's
Malema
true.
is the
True.
Denton Kimathi of Kenya.
That's true. Of South Africa. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, now he's the South African equivalent of what Denton Kimathi was to Kenya. Kenyatta probably equate him to Mandela. Actually, there are parallels you can draw.
Definitely. But I because Malema is not a soldier, it's difficult to make that comparison, right? But I completely get what you mean, right? I completely get what you mean. You sound like you're laughing.
Yeah, because you are saying Malema is not a soldier.
What do you mean?
But Malema has more as a bigger battalion of soldiers than Kimathi ever had. He has more committed soldiers. He has more passionate soldiers. He has and even has the soldier song.
I know
and he has a target that he has already earmarked.
He is a soldier, right? I mean, in the sense that he's not fighting an overt war right now, right? He's not in the bush. He's a candidate, right? Kimathi was in the bush. That's a distinct difference, right? That's a very distinct difference. Whereas the parallels between Mandela,
they are both soldiers, only that each one of them is fighting from the front that he controls the most, and the front that he has a better comparative and competitive edge.
I see. So you're saying had Kimathi been in this position, he would be very similar to Malema.
It would be extremely similar.
I agree in that sense. Okay, I misunderstood what you meant. But when you hear Malema speak, right? Not only does he remind me of these powerful leaders that, you know, I grew up learning from and gaining so much gain from in Black America and in the African American community, whether it be Malcolm X. He reminds me of the fire of Malcolm X, right? He reminds me of the fire of him and Joshua Maponga. I really like them, right? Both of them. I really think that they're incredible leaders in a lot of ways. But Malema represents something that should be a common sentiment among many Africans, just like Malcolm X, who was a Pan-Africanist, right? Just like what's his name? Marcus Garvey, right? He represents something that is so distinctly good for the diaspora. Yet the sentiment of someone like Traore is very different from, or for someone like the people of Burkina Faso or the people of South Africa. They're very different, right? Even in Kenya, it's very different. That's why he mentioned these East African countries. He was saying that, you know, when it comes to Pan-Africanism, right? The guy on Twitter, when it comes to Pan-Africanism, you cannot come to these countries and discuss it. And South Africa is among that list. What makes South Africa go from just in the 90s, one of the spearheads of this movement against white supremacy, to now this completely, you know, passive place where pretty much it's just Amapiano, right? And someone like Malema finishes fourth, I think, right? I think it was fourth. How do you go from this thing of Mandela being such a spearhead to someone like Malema, who, for all intents and purposes, could be just as effective if given the chance, right? How do you go? How do you go from
No,
these two mind states?
but you see, you are forgetting that Mandela was in prison almost 3/4 of the time Malema has been alive. So even for people to know who Malema is, short of the songs that he's singing, I don't think really really Malema represents that phase of South Africa. Mark Twain once talked about geniuses in bourgeois stupidity. I think if he was alive today, he would be talking about Malema in terms of being a genius in proletariat stupidity. Because he doesn't seem to understand the concept of power. And secondly, once you have power, how do you use it? And there are two ways of using power. You can use power to sustain yourself in power, and you can use power to benefit your people. And Malema only seems to be a genius in understanding the side of the ledger that relates to poverty, relates to powerlessness. He doesn't seem to understand how the other side operates for him to be able to overcome them and to gain the power. And that is how he can never be a Mandela.
So you're saying that he doesn't understand the power dynamics of the top, just knows how to relate to the poverty of the bottom.
To the poverty of the bottom, people without. Because number one, if he understood that, he would have known who makes presidents. He would have understood the cartels that are responsible for that, the political establishments that guarantee that.
But joining these said cartels most likely would be in direct opposition to everything he stands for.
Exactly.
But that's precisely what my point is you can't claim to have an issue with the power structure while also being like, oh yeah, well, I got to work with you to get elected. And it's like, it's a catch-22 basically, right? It's a catch-22. It's a rock and a hard place.
But that is exactly what I've said. But you see, that is now the art of governing. The art of governing is how to manage those in a way that you are able to destroy those structures of inequality without necessarily destroying the system. Changing the system without threatening the powers that be. Such that even when you start attacking the powers that be, when you start attacking the cartels are either clapping for you because they think you are on their side, or the powers that be that you want to destroy and the systems you want to destroy, they are behind you. And that is a complex art of governance that Malema is incapable of understanding. And this is why those who support him and those who see him as a Pan-Africanist
Keep talking.
also
I will be right
do
back.
not seem to understand what being a Pan-Africanist is. Are you there? I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
My bad. I'm here. I had to open the door real quick. But no, I'm listening. That's why I asked you to keep going on that. But you were saying?
I am saying that unless you understand those contradictions and
Mhm.
those dynamics, it becomes very hard for you to rise to power. But more important, when you are in power, how do you destroy and dismantle those systems and those cartels and those structures and those institutions that had prevented these resources from reaching the people you are representing.
That's
And
it.
I don't think Malema understands the complexities involved in somebody like him rising to power, but now once on power, how to use it. And it is for the same reasons that I think the people who are considering him a Pan-Africanist also miss the point.
That's confusing, man. That's very confusing. I'll be honest.
Let's look at it historically.
Hmm.
Kwame Nkrumah, a Pan-Africanist, exactly what needed to be done. Africans must unite, a very simple concept, but done the wrong time. After all these guys were fighting for independence, they were fighting to be called Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister. There is nothing that would have been given to these leaders to give up that title of Mr. President or Your Excellency for the sake of Africa. That was completely the wrong time. In South Africa today, Malema might have all the ideas about Pan-Africanism, but how do you tell people in Soweto about a Pan-Africanism when they can't even feed their children, when they can't take their children to school, when they do not have even the most basic, but they are surrounded by plenty? How do you tell them about a neighbor when their own children are dying, they are starving, they are sleeping hungry and outside? So
That's
you
very
must
true.
be a nationalist to be a good Pan-Africanist.
I see. So, and this is very complicated because you have this idea when it comes to not just Pan Africanism, but you have this idea when it comes to uh, the unity among nations. But what you're saying about nationalism is really a very logical statement, right? It's not something that it's obvious, but only after you state it. It's not obvious when you're analyzing it, um, especially because if you're to look at something from a nationalistic perspective, it's not like Kenya or a another African country that has a more fully black population. Like South Africa has a lot of Europeans there that were born there that claim to be African, right? So when you talk being nationalistic, that has a whole different context in South Africa because it's like some of the people that control the country, the white South Africans that control the country, do they consider themselves as nationalists? Should Malema consider them as a part of a nationalist plan if he were to think and operate as a nationalist? That's a difficult context, right? So how do you tackle that problem of trying to be a nationalist and have nationalist and building nationalist ideas if the people who control the nation currently only look at the nation as the white versions of South Africa? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, I get it, but I can understand you who doesn't like soccer thinking that way.
I like soccer. I just watch more American football.
You don't watch it.
You brought me to Pittsburgh, man. I'm gonna watch American football. I'm not gonna watch, I'm not gonna watch like soccer. I'm gonna watch the NBA. I'm gonna watch American football. I keep up with it. I keep up with soccer, but
you see, you have traveled, so you know the difference between all this. But the basic difference everywhere is simply what you can see and what you can hear. It is a skin color, it is a dialect. And that dialect just needs to be one that is not Bantu. And if you're in South Africa, you know that is a foreigner. When you are looking at a Moroccan, when you are looking at an Egyptian, and you are looking at a Boer, and you are in Uganda, do those people look different? They don't look different. So now you are only thinking of nationalism and thinking of Boers and blacks, forgetting that Pan-Africanism is 1,000 times more complex than that. If you cannot construct a nation with those different colors, how will you create a nation with more colors and more dialects? And you see, because of the level of poverty in South Africa, they have grown also to believe that anything foreign is a threat to us. This is the problematic we associate with the middle class when it comes to elections, that they are comfortable where they are. They don't want any other change. The South Africans, the same way, we are almost starving. You bring these Kenyans here, even when they are investors, they are likely to take away from us. You bring these whites, and white is not just defined the way you want to define them. It is purely the color. Where you bring an Angolan who has Portuguese blood, that is a foreigner. So how do you fail to integrate South Africa within itself and expect to integrate South Africa with Egypt and Morocco, the distance notwithstanding? And this is why I say Malema is a genius, but in proletariat and proletariat stupidity. He doesn't see the complex nature of that.
See, now here's the thing, Pops. Here's the thing. I have to push back on you, because for weeks we've been discussing capturing the peasant. For weeks we've been discussing that the way that you are able to seize power in a country is around capturing the peasant. And now you're adding a totally new element to it. It's not just capturing the peasant. Capturing the peasant is just the first part. The second part is then understanding how to navigate and use the current power structure.
No. Actually, I say the easiest way of doing it is having the biggest gun and then gaining power. And then when you are in power now, you can do it in several ways by simply just showing the person the size of your gun. And the person will do what you want because he doesn't want to die. Or you get a few of those who are not afraid of dying, you give them resources that now they have a reason to live. And now you let them loose on these others. There are several ways, but you need to be at top. Malema is not at the top, Malema is at the bottom. And that is why I'm telling you, he can only understand things from the bottom, while he's able to capture and manipulate those at the bottom. There is nothing you do at the bottom there that can gain you the power. To get to the power, you must be at the table. And you must be acceptable by those on the table and at the table. And that is what 27 years of Robben Island taught Mandela. That unless you can sit down with the ones who make others. You cannot be made.
So,
In a sense,
are you saying that white supremacy must be cooperated with, whether you like it or not?
must be manipulated. It must be one of those pieces that you must know where it is and what to do with it.
But it's not going to go away.
It is not like every other powerful thing. It is not going away without a fight.
Yeah.
And that fight sometimes might require you to completely destroy the house and then reconstruct it from the bottom. You see, we are still in South Africa experiencing the difficulties of the Mandela marriage. You see, there is the Winnie Madikizela's people didn't just get subsumed in the marriage with Mandela. So the Winnie, the wing of the ANC, it is what the EFF is all about. These is the violent ones. These are the ones who didn't want a compromise. And that is why the Mandela marriage collapsed so quickly. Now the literal one. But then the other marriage now through the ANC and the National Party continued. But now this is what we are seeing. It's death.
Okay. So with that being said, right, I want to draw a comparison to Kenya, because you know, shout out to Hakeem, by the way. Hakeem, incredible writer. You know, he asked whether or not we were going to touch on Ruto's visit to America, right? Does Ruto have what you mentioned as far as the quote unquote manipulating the West / white supremacy? Does Ruto have that skill?
You see, again, you are missing the most important thing. Ruto has just known how to manipulate the system to gain power. But then when he's on power, he comes to realize that the way this animal looks when you are in power, it's very, very different from the way the animal looked from below. He comes and occupies a position and realizes that actually he can only manipulate 30% of the GDP, because the 70% goes to pay debts, and without paying debts, Kenya will completely disintegrate. So whatever else he wanted to do, he is at the mercy of those who can give him another 30% of the GDP to be able to pay government workers, and then get enough to sustain at least an element of the cartels that produce presidents, because you need it for his re-election. So now you are seeing a Ruto who has just gotten 100% from high school, goes to college, and realizes that even politics 101 he can't pass. And that is what he's trying to grapple with. And that is why I was surprised these guys you talked about who are talking about Pan-Africanists, they don't think of Ruto, who is the only leader in Africa who is talking about Pan-Africanism.
Very true.
But then he's talking about Pan-Africanism in New York.
I will give Ruto that. Ruto did pledge to remove all visa requirements for any black person in the diaspora, and that is something that I have to give him his credit. But has it been done yet, though?
No,
I don't know. He's out busy trying to visit Tyler Perry in Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. That's a good question.
But that is the thing about it, and this is what I'm saying about Malema. When you are down there, Everything is black and white. When you are at the top, there are so many pieces that you don't even know those colors. You've never even seen those colors. You never even thought they existed. Because when Ruto was trying to contest for power, he didn't imagine that the government does not have enough money to pay his workers. And this is why when he came to power, he started recruiting more and increasing the salaries. But little did he know that he didn't even have the money to pay them. And that is why now he is walking a very delicate tightrope of balancing very diametrically opposed things. He wants Pan-Africanism, but he is doing it in Washington, D.C. He is a hustler, but he is using a luxury jet from Saudi Arabia because he needs to play every game he is trying to play. He must play it by those rules because to win the game, you must follow the rules. There is no way you can, however good a soccer player you are, you cannot play soccer using volleyball or basketball rules.
Right.
So the referee for that particular game must declare you the winner.
Right.
And this is why you find, if you look at him, he looks like a chicken whose head has been cut, but he is actually trying to manipulate very different, he's trying to navigate very complex waters.
I understand. Politics in general is already complex as it is. But one thing I will say about the West and white supremacy in general is that they realized they could simplify their problems using weapons, right? And that's a hard thing. That's a really hard thing to kind of navigate because you're talking about the biggest gun, and we've had this conversation one-on-one and also with Uncle and other people before, but like, at what point should we focus on the biggest gun, on making the biggest gun, on inventing, on investing in weaponry, on investing in leverage, some form of leverage that will give us what you're talking about? Because what you're discussing makes the problem unwinnable in every situation, because we will not have the biggest gun, and we will not have the ability to stay straight while playing with these power structures. So at what point do we get the problem? Because now I'm realizing something that you mentioned a few weeks ago that I actually think is correct. Traore might have it easier than everybody else, right?
Exactly.
Traore has it way easier than everybody else, but that's why I admire him so much, because he simplified the problem. He was like, screw it. Let's take this. Let's do this. And in a few weeks, he was able to make major changes, whether it be kicking out the French, starting to refine gold, right? But as you can see, Traore actually increased military rule, right?
Exactly.
By 5 years, because he's realizing he needs some time to actually get this done, right? So
no, he has started seeing that when he's in power, it is more complex than he thought.
Yeah.
But there's a point I don't want you to lose.
Mm-hmm.
It is not just the biggest gun alone. Let me ask you, who is the king of the jungle?
In reality or in the saying?
In the jungle, in the jungle.
In the real
jungle? Who is
jungle?
called the king of the jungle?
Who is called the king of the jungle, or who is actually the king of the jungle?
Who is the king of the jungle?
I mean, the lion is called
the
king.
Which animal is the king of the jungle?
The lion is called the king of the jungle, but the real king of the jungle is tigers.
No. He is called the king of the jungle.
Yeah, but lions don't live in jungles. That's why I asked you what.
No. I'm telling you, but the lion is not the biggest. Mm-hmm. The lion is not the smartest. The lion is not the fiercest. It is not even the fastest. It is not even the strongest.
But it's the most
sometimes
courageous.
Sometimes perceptions are as important. You need to have a big gun, but perceptions about that gun are also very important. But more important than all that, it is how you project yourself. And this just takes us back to politics 101. You need to survive as a leader. You need to be a lion and you need to be a fox. A lion, there are those people that just need to be threatened. But there are those that require some level of cunningness to manipulate. And it is the marriage of those two that will get you through. The only problem comes when you go to the actual jungle and you find there are rabbits. However, even when their meat is so tender, but they cannot give you a full meal. But when it comes to voting, you want them in your camp. So you must make an alliance with them, even when they make no significant effect. So the way you want to be perceived the moment you are in power changes. And that is where many African leaders find themselves lost.
That's hard, man. That's hard. With the lion analogy though, the perception of the lion analogy is not trickery, right? The lion not only has a team of lions, but the lion will go after the biggest. It will go after the smartest. It will go after the strongest. It does it, and it will risk dying to do so, right? And many do die. Many lions die, hunting buffalo, hunting elephant, hunting even giraffe, right? Many lions die.
Yep.
But it's called, I don't think it's called the king of the jungle because it's it necessarily lives in the jungle or whatever, but I'm saying that I think that what makes it the king is its cooperation, because lions are not solitary hunters. So the lion is the king of the jungle actually because of its cooperation. So and even when you look at when we discuss, when I can't remember, it might have been you, but we were discussing Europe and Africa. You can get anywhere in Europe, right? As soon as you land, you can go everywhere because they recognize, yeah, we got borders, we have different languages, but we are one unit, right? How many wars has Europe fought amongst itself, but still is able to put aside their differences in order to tackle indigenous economies, conquer indigenous groups, conquer various complex tribe systems? They're able to cooperate. So we're talking about lions and foxes, but a lion's effectiveness is not in its strength as a individual. Lions are pack hunters. Lions hunt as groups, right? And
that is true.
And they're very good at it, right? And different parts of the lions have different jobs during the hunt.
But you said it clearly. The most important part you said is that the lion is not afraid of dying to maintain that title.
Right.
The problem with the Malemas is that when they come to power, they acquire new tastes that make them not want to die. And because they are afraid to die, they do not want to threaten other groups that they had targeted, because they are afraid those groups might organize and threaten them. And therefore now they want a coalition. Now they want an alliance. Now they want cooperation. They start talking about a national unity rather than conquering and dominating the people who have your land. So that is the biggest problem. A lion, even when it is the king of the jungle, to maintain it, it is willing to die. And that's why one lion will still try to fight 20 hyenas. That's why one lion will still try to fight 1,000 buffaloes. And when it dies, the next one in line will come and continue with the fight. African leaders, the moment they get to power, they taste the fruits of that. And it tastes so good that now they are willing to die to protect it. Even against the people that put them there. The best analogy of that is what the current CIA governor said about governments, and especially African governments. They are known for eating its own people and its own supporters. The people put you to power when now they want they want you to effect what you promised them. They are your first victims. And they are your first targets, because you don't want them to remind anybody of what you had promised, because when you get there, you join the club of eaters, not the club of those who are fighting for the people.
That's true, man. Word to Munyambo. It's our turn to eat, right? Michaela wrong. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I understand. So, th- essentially, supremacists take advantage and do their best to create a level of discord that keeps you in such a state of confusion that you are unable to balance all of these innate factors that they've created, whether it be the leverage that an individual leader gets whenever they get greedy, whether it be the amount of time colonization already did on the mines. So many different elements are at play, right?
Yes.
With Traore, for example, Traore is in a shout out K-Lo, right? Traore is he's this wild card that gets a clean slate, essentially, to develop properly.
Mm-hmm.
Should then these developing countries model that state of chaos in order to get to that clean slate? Or can they do it without the clean slate? Because it appears then that if in countries that aren't excuse me, completely destroyed, like Kenya is a very developed country, but it's so deeply entrenched in Western influence that breaking free from Western influence, Western loans, I'm pretty sure they also, to build a lot of the highways from the Chinese, used the port of Mombasa as leverage, right? Which is insane to me, right? That's insane to me. But is development from a Western world worth that, right? Or do you think that the Traore route is the only way that Africa can reach that consensus without getting involved with the sliminess of leaders reaching there and then not wanting to give that up? What do you think the course of action should be for a country that is as developed as Kenya, right, versus a country like Burkina Faso, where they can start from scratch, which I'm now realizing is actually a luxury, right?
Let's not even go so far. Let's just compare two neighbors, Kenya and Tanzania.
Okay.
You see, Kenya has a lot, way, way more than Tanzania in terms of GDP. But to be able to do anything, there are so many cartels that must have their hands on the pie, such that there is hardly anything that gets now allocated for development. Tanzania, on the other hand, with fewer resources, they seem to be doing a much better development than Kenya. Even just looking at how the means of communication that is happening. I mean, they have not yet developed to the standards of Kenya, but Tanzanians seem to be happier with their government than the Kenyans are. Because sometimes it's not what you have per se that is important. It is what you have in comparison to your neighbor. So Kenyans, if you are the only person with a bicycle in a community, you are happier than if you are the one with the worst vehicle in the same community. Even though a saloon car is way better than a bicycle, but when you had a bicycle, you were happier because you were the top dog. Now, when you are the very bottom, you are not as happy. Much of these things you are seeing can be explained in terms of that. Even when we talk about these Western leaning democracies and development, there is actually nothing inherently wrong with development that is driven by the West, as long as it is development. Sometimes we mistake exploitation for development. We say just because the document is titled development, that what is in it is development. If our cooperation with the West was such that we reduce the amount of resources that goes to the West as a result of that cooperation, as long as we ensure that our resources, our finances do not go now to the West, as long as we ensure the loans that we get are in terms that are advantageous to the Africans, there will be nothing wrong with it. But the thing is that the leaders, the African leaders who go to negotiate this, are driven by selfish motives. They are driven by their desire to gain privately. They are able to sell the public for a private gain. And the Western countries know this. So they find it is easier to do business with a private guy to go and now build the Western public sector. I mean, any businessman, that is what profit margin is. If you can produce at the minimum and sell your product at the maximum, then you have made profits. We talk of this interaction as if it is not a market interaction. The only problem is that the African salesperson is not a trained salesman, he's a highway mechanic who just wants to link the parts in a way that it just takes the driver and the owner of the vehicle to the farthest from where they are, that they can't come back to demand their money. But the aim is not to make anything. It is just to connect it and facilitate him to go to the next highway mechanic. So let us not mistake this. If we had good negotiators, if we had development conscious leaders, if we had leaders who are more driven by a desire to develop the public, even sometimes at the expense of their private interests, we would be able to negotiate with the Western powers almost at equal terms.
Okay. Where should that start? Where should that process start? In a country,
now that is where
like
your
Kenya.
Traore comes in.
Okay. No,
I'm saying Traore now is in a position to say
separate from Traore. Because Traore can't have control over a country like Kenya. Traore doesn't have control over a country like South Africa, right? But these problems are more like Traore went to a global forum and asked them all, why are we suffering and you are eating? Right? Traore has the power and is doing that, but he cannot speak for Kenya. He cannot speak for other aspects of Africa that have these still have these people who are willing to get private gain in expense for the public, right?
Mhm.
The Traore appears to not be that, right? And his actions are proving it day in and day out. He's also a no nonsense, no bullshit kind of person. It's very obvious. But a country like Kenya, a country like Tanzania is a little bit different, but South Africa, they're not like that, right? They're not like that. So how do you get that kind of leader in a context where militarily they have the options to prevent a coup like Traore? They have the weaponry and the support from Western countries that would help them prevent a coup like Traore from someone like Traore getting into power. So you're claiming that we need a leader that is development conscious and is willing to sacrifice personal for public, but how do you get that in a country that's already been doing that for the past almost 100 years now?
But you see, and that is why now when you hear people talking about Mandela having been a sellout, it is when the balance was just about to tilt in favor of the blacks. Mandela was released to come and tell them about compromise. And that compromise was long enough to give back control to the whites. It gave them an opportunity now to pause the demands by the Africans, and then the whites were able to regroup. So now the only way again back there is through Malema. And that is why I've said he is reviving this, but Malema only knows it from the bottom. Unless, of course, he's hiding his other cards until he gets there. Because when you are taking a cow to the slaughterhouse, you don't show it the noose before you have tied all the legs, because it will run away or it will turn into a buffalo and kill you. So unless Malema has cards that he's hiding, and we cannot tell that until he is able to kill the Boers and to kill the farmers to get the land. But the question is, when he gets there to where Mandela was, how will he not say the same thing that we want a South Africa where everybody has a stake in it? You talk a lot about white supremacists. White supremacists know that they are the minority and they can never be part of the majority at any one time. So, like 50 Cent, they want to rule or die trying. The problem with Africans, it is this thing about we are the majority, we can do whatever we want, and their majority is just about a vote that you are putting in a box, and you don't even know how many other votes are already put in the box before you put yours. And you don't know who put those votes there. So the person who controls the ballot boxes, even if he's one, even if he's alone or just a group of 10, they can be more powerful than the 100 or 120 million voters, because it is just depends on the paper you put there, and they control the boxes so they can put as many papers as possible. Or, as it has happened in Kenya, you don't even need to go the tedious work of marking the papers and putting them there. Just get the person who has the microphone to announce the outcome of those papers. And the one you have said is the winner then becomes the winner. There are so many ways of sabotaging this will of the majority. And that is what supremacists have invested a lot in. Now in America, we are seeing a new weapon, just the human element showing up. We are seeing what is happening in the southern border area. Guys from Latin America are overpowering the most sophisticated military in the world, and they are getting to America. Something like that can happen. South Africans can do that. They can invade these farms. They can overpower the Boers. But you can't do that. You can't do that without literally killing the Boer, killing the farmer. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
So you mentioned something before about obviously America and the psychological warfare that occurs here, right? Um and it's called ideological subversion, right? But it was from Yuri Bezmenov, right, a KGB defector, and he was discussing ideological subversion, which is the slow process of psychological warfare to change the perception of the reality for everyday Americans, where regardless of the amount of information that they're able to come across, they're still unable to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, right? And that is a very, very deep. That's a deep analysis, and that's a deep plot. But that's something that has occurred on the continent. Ideological subversion, where regardless of how much information is here, regardless of how much we know about the conquering of the destruction of the black civilization, Chancellor Williams, right? Regardless of how much we know about the destruction of our civilization, as whether you want to call us Bantus, whether you want to call us Moors, right? Whether you want to call us the people of the book, word to the bishop, right? Whether you want to call us, whatever you want to call us, our destruction was a form of ideological subversion. How do you reverse an ideological subversion where you get people to destroy the interest in defending themselves, their families, their community, their country, in this brainwashing process where they first demoralize you, right? Stage one is demoralization. Stage two would then be to basically, after they're demoralized, they would then be exposed to different forms of information that then changed themselves into a state of hopelessness, right? But all of these things took 10, 20, 50, 60 years, right? If you were to create a plan, right? And I'm sorry, my battery just killed for the camera, right? But audio staying in. If you were to, please bear with us for the final little bits, but if you were to create a plan that was around this demoralization and getting rid of some of this perspective, how would you go about that while also maintaining state capacity, while also having the perception of the gun? It's hard for me to recognize where you're stating the priority order of lists should occur. Or are you saying there is no list in order? We just know what needs to be done and it's extensive.
You become too complex. I didn't know now you've become a professor to just complicate very simple things.
Now, man,
Rather than all
I'm
those,
trying to touch on what you had stated, because you've created this picture that paints how complex it actually is, which means that for someone who is young like me, finding out where we pick up the baton and what needs to be done first is the biggest problem for us, because we are dealing with hundreds of years of contextual issues, right? And conditioning. So if 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 Malema cannot unite without the poor, but he also can't be elected without the rich, but developed African countries still need to be weary of their partnerships with underdeveloped countries that may have more freedom. Where do we start is what I'm saying.
when I'm consulting for development, when they ask me exactly the same question, and they ask me how come all these attempts towards development have not made any headways, I tell them of just something that is very basic. Unite the fears of the rich with poverty. Make the two understand the intricate relationship between the desires of the poor and the fears of the rich. If you make them understand that this is one and the same problem, the rich cannot live and sleep comfortably without fear of them being overpowered by the poor. And the poor cannot understand their condition without reference to the rich. If you can bring the two to the table, you'll have a solution. And sometimes the solution is so easy that just rather than constructing those high walls with barbed wire and then they have electric fences, just pipe water and connect it to just the space between the road and the wall for a poor man to grow vegetables for his family. That poor man now gets an interest in ensuring that you continue surviving to continue paying for that water, and is very comfortable and you can sleep comfortably. You have talked so in complex ways about this ideological conditioning. You should have just looked at it from Animal Farm, one of the basic books that almost everybody who goes to school reads. How did Napoleon make the chicken be the ones that are saying 4 legs good, 2 legs bad? And somebody reminds the chicken, but you had 2 legs, and then he starts looking at himself for the first time and sees, oh, my wings were supposed to be the other pair of legs. The African doesn't behave any differently. But now, with what is happening in America, we realize this has nothing to do with the problems of Africa. This is just the problems of the common man. There are those who are saying even Trump being now a convicted felon, that felony conviction doesn't mean anything. And the interesting part
not to mention, right? If you're a felon, you can't get a job.
No, you can't vote.
You can't get a job. You can't vote, but when you are a felon, can run for president.
Vote. But right. When you are a felon and you are rich, you can be elected as president. Exactly. And nobody sees that contradiction.
Not to mention, exactly but they raised $35 million for him in like 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It is exactly the same complex. How does this person who is saying, oh, the felon conviction doesn't mean much, how does he not connect, oh, I can't vote my own choice because I'm a felon, yet now this felon? It is exactly the same problem. And now I'm beginning to see it is one of the psychoses of democracies.
Wow.
You wouldn't find this stupidity in dictatorships. Somebody who is that stupid has no right to live.
Man, to mention, hang on, not even to cut you off, but this is super essential that I make this point before we close out, because we're approaching hour 15 mark, right? And shout out to everybody in the chat. I thank you guys for your continued support. The channel is growing every week. I know there's no signal for the camera, but you know, please let me know if you can still hear me. Put a 1 in the chat if you can still hear me. But there is a very distinct thing that I noticed, and that is all of the powers. You told me that when it comes to actual rule, the military powers did not come to be how they were through democracy. They actually all came to be about through seriously long, arduous military dynasties that kept their power for a long time. And then later on, once they had a big enough gun, they were like, okay, now we can pretend to be democratic and fair and, you know, be the moral high ground. And that's something that I realized. I was like, China was a dynasty. It was a monarchy dynasty for many years, and it was a war state. Whether you go from China to the Ottoman Empire to Genghis, whether you go from Genghis to even America, right? Even America, the first president of America was a war general fighting a war, right? So like we can't sit here and that was when I finally realized that my bias about democracy was that ideological subversion, and I was that chicken who didn't have, you know, 4 legs, but I was like two legs is bad, right? Or dictatorship
Mhm.
is bad. But the biggest threat in Africa was during colonization, a little bit earlier, was King Shaka actually uniting the Bantu tribes, conquering them and saying them, no, our petty beefs don't matter. We need to unite, and if you don't want to unite, then we'll just kill you, right? But we have to conquer this supremacist. And that's something that I'm realizing Traore could be that, right? And this could be the start of Africa finally deciding that, yeah, regardless of all of these quote unquote development things, we need to have one strong leader that is willing to do this, one strong move that will help
Mhm.
simplify these complexities and narrow the problem down, right? And I completely agree. But we're at 116. I got some ones in the chat. Shout out K-Lo. Shout out everybody who showed up, cousins, everybody who's here. Selena, thank you so much for everybody for coming out. But Professor, we're going to have to move this to next week's talk. It's such a great talk. But any last words, any last thoughts that you want to leave the viewers with before we head out?
No, no, I was just saying you can't think of Shaka as a good leader or a great leader without thinking of their Segai, the weapon that he decided. Mandela could have left us a better place if he had made a nuclear bomb, and he had the materials to do it. So we cannot just be great through politics or through democracy. At least we need that big gun, but that is also just the beginning.
Right, right. That's great, man. Well, thanks so much, Pops. Professor, everybody loves your views. We're gonna be sure to get Professor on cam soon. But he likes to stay off cam. He likes his privacy. And we this format works, man. Everybody really likes his insight. But put a 1 in the chat if you want the professor to cam up. If we can get monetized, get 1,000 likes by the time next month happens, we will do our best to get Professor on cam. But you know how it is when it comes to African parents. So I appreciate everybody for coming out. This was another great episode of Diasporas, and thank you so much. And Pops, Professor, thank you so much for being on, and look forward to next time. We will have more guests as well. Looking forward to having some discussions on Francis Cress, having some discussions on West Africa. We have some Bamini K friends who are here, and they have just incredible insight. But Pops is gonna be here regardless. So thanks so much, Pops, and thanks for being on with us.
Okay, welcome.
All right. Enjoy your day, everybody.